The electrical grid has traditionally been very monolithic. It's connected via a lot of wires. It's very centralized. But what if we could do something different? Let's talk about decentralizing the electrical grid. This is a trend that's been happening. There's companies like Solar City out in California that have been putting up solar panels all over the place, but this trend is accelerating. It is getting bigger. Let's talk about this in more detail. Lucas, fill me in on where we're at with decentralizing the electrical grid. What should we be looking at, and what is bringing this to your attention?
Well, we have Tobias here today. Welcome, Tobias,
Thank you.
who I think might be more have more ideas about decentralizing the grid. It's something I think probably chiefly relies around electrical storage and batteries, and there might be something to iron batteries. I don't know about your thoughts about that, but we have Tobias and I have a mutual friend who knows that I'm interested in both decentralizing power, changing the accounting that we have behind municipal utilities, and thought we would have an interesting conversation. So, Tobias, I put that question to you. Um, what do you see in the future with as far as the decentralization of the grid?
Well, I see a much more user focus on decentralizing the grid, just as an individual consumer itself. Right now, a lot of our power is generated, and a lot of decisions of what power is generated is outside of our control. Typically, you're fortunate if you're dealing with a municipal utility because they tend to be a little bit more efficient in their business operations. But the majority of the power that's delivered and generated across the grid, across all three grids in the North American continent, in particular, are all in the control of what are considered to be public utilities, but really are investor-owned utilities that are based off of shareholder profit value and that kind of thing. So we think it's important for the grid to be decentralized for a multitude of reasons, and each one can get pretty complex. We can talk about the failures of the centralized grid as it stands now, and why we're here to this point. We can talk about the assertions that renewables are causing problems for a grid, as opposed to really just making the problems that have already been there more visible. And we can talk about how the problems with the grid governance and just how the grid affects every part of our life. So you tell me where you want to start, and I can kind of go from there.
Well, the I think maybe one of the truest things that you mentioned, and something that's not talked a lot because people focus a lot about the source of power and other things, but you said that we call our electrical generation companies, our power plants, we call them publicly owned, but in reality they're investor owned. And I think that that you're exactly right, that the incentives of investors are very different than those of users, that we might that would be that our expectation is whenever we say public. So can you dig into that aspect of it?
Absolutely. So, like I said, typically these investor-owned utilities, they're the ones that are putting the money to the capital investment into the projects, whether it's a generator, whether it's a transmission, and of course, as they should get a certain rate of return. They are making a deal that they are going to always supply power every time you plug your phone into the outlet. That power will always be there to charge your phone. So there is a certain there's definitely an argument that they need to be financially stable. They need to be able to conduct their business for a long period of time, 20, 30 years down the road when they do this. However, it's funny that you mentioned, not only is the corporate entity beholden to profit and shareholder value and all that, but the utility business model itself is very unique. And the way that it currently is set up is utilities are actually, it is better for a utility to be more inefficient than it is for it to be efficient, because the more power they can sell, the more they can stay financially stable, the more they can stick around for 20 to 30 years. When you start talking about things like efficiency or individuals generating power via solar panels or wind turbines or any of the smaller generation things that there are out there, that's when they start selling less electricity that they generate. They start making less money, and so for them, that's just not a feasible option moving forward. So it
Is
kind of goes
is
back
that is
to
that situation starting to happen more in California? It's my understanding that this is starting to take place. Is that there's so much power that's being generated by solar panels that they actually have an excess of power in California that's being generated by small operators.
absolutely, absolutely, and then of course the easy answer is, well, that's the fault of the renewables, and it's not. Let me actually let me look at a different area, the Pacific Northwest, where there's a lot of renewables. A lot of hydropower comes from renewables. I took part in a grid operator panel once several years back, and the Secretary of Energy was giving the keynote address, and he gave this great story that in May 10th of 2010, during 1 hour in the afternoon, this eastern storm came through, started blowing strong winds. All the wind turbines immediately started going full steam and basically outputting what would be 2 nuclear power plants worth of energy. Okay, that's fine. So where do we? What? And I should take a step back. What a lot of people don't understand is when it comes to the grid, supply must always meet demand. There's very, very room for flexibility there. So if I plug my phone in, whatever power I'm demanding at that moment hasn't been generated yet. It's then generated on a split second, whether it was a drop of water or a piece of wind or crushed coal. That that supply must always meet to match demand. If that doesn't happen, really bad things occur. Of course, everybody can see, yes, if there's too much power going down the lines, things will explode, which doesn't happen. The grid will black out before that happens. But what people don't understand is if there's too little supply, that also causes like sagging lines, line voltage drops, which is very, very damaging to critical equipment. So whether there's too much or too little power is a death sentence for the grid. So it's important to always be balancing that supply with demand. So we have these 2 nuclear power plants worth of projects or energy, storming down these lines on this May day. Now, the problem with May in Oregon, and anybody that lives in the area knows that, it starts raining sometime in November and it doesn't stop until about June. So the rivers are just swollen. That Columbia River that's racing down the mountains is causing all the hydro dam generators to start ramping up their electricity production too, right? Because what's the choice? If you have all this water, they can either close the spillways and basically flood the areas around them, or they can open up the water, let it flow through the generators and produce electricity. All right. So the other thing about May is that all that winter snowpack up in the Cascades, that's starting to melt. And so that's also coming down the rivers here. So that makes that issue with, okay, we've got too much power coming through the lines. Now we have this other wind power that's coming through the lines, and the transmission just isn't capable of delivering it. There's no one capable of taking that power. And so you've got this huge excess of power. So what do you do?
Well,
Well,
let me ask you a question on that one because I've heard some people in the Bitcoin community say that this is one of the reasons why Bitcoin is so important because it can be an elastic sink for power when you don't need all that power, or it can help to offset some of the power costs as well.
you are exactly right. Those are the perfect type of customers that could take on this extra power. Maybe start, have some standby mining rigs. I've actually worked with some Bitcoin miners doing some amazing things on both sides, not just taking that extra power, but they're also beautiful people for what we call demand response. And we can get into that a little bit later as well too. Which all these solutions are necessary, right? So basically, to finish
Well,
off my example. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
well, piggybacking off that though, and that is a wonderful innovation to bring towards a surplus of power. But you're pointing out to both problems in transmission. So you have too much power to transmit, and the other problem that I would imagine is lurking comes in July, August, and September. Whenever it's hot, people are running air conditioners, and you don't have as much renewal. You don't have as much energy coming down the line. So
Exactly.
we mentioned storage earlier, and I've wondered how when we're going to see adequate amount of batteries or other methods of storing electrical power. But continue on. So we have more rain. We have a lot of power coming down the lines in Oregon. Keep going.
Right. So basically, we've come into this perfect situation where there's not a whole lot that can be done. Like I said, there's no one to take the power. There's no lines to actually transmit that power. We could open the spillways. That is a potential, let the water through. But the problem in May in Oregon is that's when the salmon, the little fishlings, are around. So they're not allowed to actually do that, because if they flood the spillways, they ravage the salmon community, which is a huge industry up in the Pacific Northwest. So basically, what you have here is an issue that has to deal with economical issues. It has to deal with geographical issues, cultural issues, ecology issues. All of this is the problem that we kind of face with our grid and that central power plant model that we live with today. It's so the solution was basically, hey, we're going to shut off the wind farms. So we're going to stop generating power. That brings its own problems, because there's also people that own those wind farms and they're not making money if they shut those things off. What do they care if there's too much power? What do they get? They're not in the delivery business. They're in the business of generating electricity, and you want them to turn off their stuff to do that when at its most profitable. So those are the issues that we keep coming up with. And there's lots of, everybody wants to give excuses, like, again, going back to, oh, it's renewables. That's the renewable problem. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be a renewable problem. What if there's massive rain? Then you've got a massive amount of hydropower, which actually happened again a couple of years later in this area. So it's an issue both with or more what we consider reliable capacity generators, and it's a problem with renewable generators. However, that doesn't mean that there's not a solution. And there's a lot of solutions that have been kind of out there in the industry, like you mentioned, battery storage. The problem with battery storage at the grid scale is it's very cost prohibitive for them. So yes, they can make a little bit of money off building out new capital projects for batteries and everything. But a typical battery, utility scale battery right now would take up maybe about a half of a block of space. So you've got space issues, right? And that has to be those have to be located in multiple places throughout the city. Or if it's a rural area, they may not really have the type of demand to justify the cost of that battery. So while batteries are definitely a huge part of the solution, taking a look at the demand side is also another potential solution. And if you combine the two, what we found is that you can make up for that dispatchable capacity versus that variable capacity. You can have battery storage, you can have demand side opportunities that are both working together to account for either that extra energy or for the lack of energy. So that's
So,
what the product. Go ahead.
well,
Sorry.
so what you're saying here is, one, there's a demand queuing issue, and the demand queuing issue goes to the variability in supply, and the variability of supply of renewables. We shouldn't be concerned about, or those who need power. I say we, those who need power and are looking for power aren't concerned about whether energy comes from renewable or from where it's coming about. What they're concerned about is having power. But then whenever we get into the diversity of the types of power that's being generated, we have this demand queue problem. And the line from the coal companies or from traditional power is, we can't turn our coal plant off and on, so we need to be first in that queue. But
Mhm.
but what I'm seeing here is a problem the in the communication of the billing and the cost of that power that's very difficult to convey to consumers. But I also think that we have better communication. We have things. We have a more nuanced and an ever growing concept of money and the diversity of money and the specificity of it. And I think that some of that might be where we can find a solution for uh, you know relating to the consumer the difference of the times whenever there's a lot of power at hand and not. And I also say that because you mentioned, all the windmills are turning full bore. Um, I live in the high plains, and we have a lot of wind farms here. But
Mhm.
even on windy days, often those wind farms are turned off. And the reason that they're turned off is because of that demand queue. And because the coal companies have stepped in front to maintain the demand, they're looking at the electricity that's being pulled off the grid, and the wind farms are only turned on when there's a high demand and there's wind. And
Correct.
and that to me is just incredibly inefficient for everybody.
Right. And you're exactly right. And it's important to kind of look at the history of how we got here. That is just inherent of the central plant model again. And I'm not saying we need to do away completely with the central plant model. I what we envision is basically a grid made up of microgrids, whether that's a coal plant. A coal plant itself could be technically considered a microgrid, only connected to the larger grid when, say, an industrial process needs it, or some type of commercial property needs it. Because typically the coal plants and everything, that's really the power that they're providing. Those are their customers, the commercial, the industrial customers. Residential, we're at a point now with residential where with renewables we can supply residential across the board during certain periods, times of the day, right? Never at night, of course, but during the day, it's possible for 100% renewable generation to handle all residential loads. Okay, so and that's just kind of where we are now. So what we envision is a hybrid grid, basically, where yes, there are certain fossil fuels that we will need to use. Natural gas is very important. Coal is actually very important for some industrial processes. It's not just the electricity we get from that coal. That's also broken up into other components that are then used further on down all sorts of different supply chains, right? So it's important to recognize there is a certain need for fossil fuel usage. However, that doesn't mean that we should be inefficient with using finite resources, right? And right now, there's no impetus to make a investor-owned utility be as efficient as possible with those resources. In fact, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier. It's more profitable for them to be inefficient than it is for them to be efficient, because if they have a coal generator that can't, make up enough electricity for this brand new data center they're bringing in, well, that just means that they've got to build another coal generator or another natural gas generator, which it comes with a 10% rate of return guaranteed over a 20, 30-year depreciable period of time. So big money, right? So that's the kind of weird incentive that investor-owned utilities have. Now, there's another side to this that we haven't really mentioned, and that's the upkeep of these systems, the operating expense annually. And so for a natural gas plant, the operating expense can easily get into, say, $25-30 million a year. So that's chopped up, divided up, and sent to all of our bills, right? So those operating expenses can include stuff like maintenance, or it could be maintenance on lines, tree trimming. That's a big one. Trees. If you look outside and you look at the wires coming into your house, take a look at the trees and how close they are, because if they're within 2 feet, the utility is actually not doing their job, because that should be, those trees should be trimmed back. The majority of blackouts and brownouts are caused not just by trees and overgrowth, but also by wildlife. And that's another funny story for another time. But let's say that utility's got to spend, say, $100,000 a year on making sure that there's guys out there trimming trees and everything. That money, again, is divided up and passed on, but they can't profit off that money, right? So let's say that they have $200,000 available to them. They want to take $100,000. They want to invest that in capital projects because that gets that rate of return. They make profit and they can have more shareholders investing in it. That other $100,000 is going to go towards maintenance to make sure that, yes, what we've said we're going to provide is actually there to provide. The equipment is being maintained properly. But the thing is, with maintenance, it's a non-event, right? Like, you spend money on something not to happen. You spend money on things not to break down. And it's real easy not to spend that money sometimes. Let's say we've got a project that's not $100,000, but it's $125,000. So we're going to take that 25 from the other 100 that we have for operating expenses, and we're going to pump it into this capital project. And that's going to get us an extra 10% rate of return, right, over that, period of time. So everybody's happy, and nothing's really happened too much on the maintenance side. I mean, how fast do trees grow? How fast does equipment wear out, right? And so year after year, this can go on until you get something like what happened in 2017 with PG&E in the California market, that was responsible for the Camp Fire that burned down the town of Paradise. It was high winds coming through at a period of time where they have a very long transmission line that's been ignored for decades, right? They might have people go out and check these, but these are very, very hard to reach places. So, you've got a guy in a truck going out and taking a look at these hooks on this line saying, they look good to me. And then after a couple of decades, all of a sudden, when the hooks wears through, line drops into some brush, it starts a fire, it burns down people's homes, 93 people killed. The utility was tried and convicted of 93 counts of manslaughter. And the CEO got up there and he said, "We're sorry, we're going to do better." And so when we look at that, we say, okay, what led to that? And if you go back to the records, you see that they had a hook that was literally built by a company that supplied horses and buggies 95 years ago. And that hook had been sitting on that line for those 95 years, had literally worn all the way through the steel and dropped that line. So it's that kind of stuff that's not only a screwy kind of incentive for the utility to ease up on maintenance, but it's also that type of incentive that is allowed for tragedies like the Paradise Fire to happen, for basically every single California fire that's happened since 2015. You can go back to the records and see for a fact it was usually started by PG&E equipment malfunctioning in some form or fashion due to a lack of maintenance. And I'd be interested to see about this one that just happened a couple months ago. I'm not going to get into conjecture, but I've yet to see any kind of reason yet. And so I won't be surprised to find that it could have been some type of a generation issue or transmission issue that caused that. So I think it's more important now than ever for all of us to really take a look and know what is going on in our electrical grid, because it's also our entire civilization revolves around it. We've all experienced blackouts. It's not very fun. What do? You sit in the dark, you wait for someone else to turn the power on. Well, what happens if it's not possible to turn the power on? Spain just realized this, and again, some type of anomalous frequency or whatever caused line frequency to change rapidly, bringing the whole grid down. So we take it for granted. This is an amazing thing that was built over the last 100 years using all types of technologies that have to, when coal plants first came out, they weren't as efficient. Well, then a new efficient coal plant comes out 20 years later. That one coal plant has to work with the other ones. So technological leaps are hard to come by. So, this goes on for the course of a century. We are where we're at today. And I feel like the investor-owned utilities have made it in such a way and have been able to deregulate, or the deregulation of intelligent regulations. Not all of them. Like there's plenty that need to be gone, but there are a lot of intelligent regulations that have been canceled in the recent years, and we're starting to see the issues that are starting to arise from those regulations being gone. Like there's a utility in the Midwest. I won't name names right now because I have a personal relationship with them. They supply power to two different states. One state has regulations that are very loose. The other state, not so much. So what they'll do is if they have a rate case, which is basically them going to the state saying, we want to charge more money and here's why. And the state has to approve it or deny it. So they go to that one state that has very light regulations, and that state says, okay, sure, you can go ahead and do that. Well, then they'll take that decision to the other state and use it as a precedence for that positive decision in the state with stricter regulations, to where the state has no choice but to say, okay, we'll go ahead and do that. And they recently did this in the past year and tacked on, they're part of 21 states that tacked on $700 billion in rate increases over the next 20 years, spread out amongst all their customers for maybe only a couple pennies each, maybe up to a couple of dollars, all for the money that was made the night of January or February 2021 for the winter storm Uri in Texas that everybody also knows about, like, oh, renewables failed. No. That was a coordinated profit generating incident, and we are all paying for it. 21 different states, people in 21 different states are paying for that for the next 20 years. So these are the reasons why we believe that not only is decentralization of the grid necessary, but public governance is also necessary. So we need a new hybrid model, basically, to make sure that our grid's in good hands and can sustain the civilization that we want. And not only that, but we want to see everybody get access to power that wants it. You mentioned, oh, just the people looking for this power. We all use power, right? So that's where we decided to come up with a solution with something that was transparent, something that was decentralized, something that was non-fungible. And you use those terms and it just happens to be synonymous with another industry. And that's why really we're here talking today about this, is because we feel that through the blockchain, there is a possibility to decentralize this grid in a way and give every single person who uses it the possibility of actually being able to improve their own equity themselves.
So Tobias, you've mentioned we, and so who is we, and what do you see as a tool for stepping closer to decentralization?
All right, so a group of you know how it goes when you're in a career. You meet good people in different companies, and you kind of stay in touch with them because their expertise may be valuable down the line. Well, a group of 4 or 5 of us have gotten together from working together over the last 20 years. Just a little background about myself: I work in the energy. I work in the energy industry. I've worked both for utilities. I've worked both for demand or in the demand side of things. I've worked with grid operators. And my specialty is efficiency, because there's not a single commercial property we walk into that we can't shed 30% of their consumption just by making them pay attention. There's no customer comfort. There's no sacrifice on anybody's part. In fact, we cause their operating expenses to be cheaper, which should trickle down to the cost of their products and make everything cheaper. But it doesn't always work that way. So what we keep seeing over and over and over again is there's this huge consumption issue that we have. We don't have a demand issue. We have a consumption issue. And this isn't us, but that argument quickly gets turned into, oh, well, I've got to turn my air conditioning off, a couple hours out of a day. And we're saying, no, those couple hours a day, it's not necessary for offices and those type of properties to use as much energy as they were when everybody's in the office for a full day. So we keep seeing this over and over and over again. And finally, we decided, well, hey, what would happen if we were to take basically all the consumption and put it in a visible area? Make sure that, in an anonymous way. So you have a building, like, let's say you look at an office building, you can pull up the blockchain and you can say, what does that property use? It doesn't matter who owns it or whatever. It's just, what does the property use? And you can see the consumption patterns, and you can see if they have generation capabilities like solar panels, you can see those generation patterns. And we want to make that information available to everyone, and not just at the commercial side of things, but all the way down to the residential side of things. So what we decided to do was, let's just start with the cul-de-sac. All right, let's keep this very simple. There's 5 houses on a cul-de-sac. Maybe 2 of them have solar panels. Maybe 2 of them have batteries. Maybe 1 of them has nothing. All right, but if all of them were connected together, and this is kind of another thing where we think a lot about underground connections and those kind of things, but if all of these houses were connected together, they would essentially create their own microgrid. So you've got 2 homes that can generate power, 2 homes that can store power, and all the homes using this power throughout the day. Maybe you store more power than all that neighborhood needs. So that neighborhood is then, or that cul-de-sac is then connected to another cul-de-sac, and that cul-de-sac is connected to another one until you form a neighborhood of microgrids. And the neighborhoods of microgrids are connected to other ones until you form statewide, national wide, global wide. So that's the scale. That's the scale of what we're looking at, basically, is all the way down to the individual being able to manage their consumption, their energy usage. The commercial properties, say, let's talk about Bitcoin miners. If they know how much power that they use on a regular basis, and they can basically make a calculation to say, if I'm running this much power and I have this much opportunity to mine a coin, here's my output. Well, what happens on days where the utility comes in and says, hey, we're willing to pay you $250 for every kilowatt of load that you shed. So all of a sudden, now they have an incentive to not run their miners because they're guaranteed that $250 per, almost sometimes could be per mining machine. And if they have 200 of them, then that all of a sudden becomes a very profitable hour of business for them. So not only are Bitcoin miners perfect for being able to use that excess energy, like you mentioned earlier, they're also perfect for the demand side solution of accounting for peak demand. Hey, everybody needs to come home and turn on their air conditioners. I'm going to make money by turning off my mining rigs. So that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to provide a solution that not only encouraged efficiency, but also people could profit from efficiency, whether that's at the residential, commercial, or industrial space. So that's kind of a bird's eye view of our project, and it gets much more detailed as we go into it.
Well, I'm so very interesting to hear that that you see in part of the solution bringing visibility to consumption, and I also like that you're beginning to break apart consumption from demand, which is
Yes.
also very important. And a question that was lurking in my mind that you answered with, and I didn't foresee this, but I love it. The cul-de-sac model was what degree of decentralization was ideal? Because it also seems that we've had this conversation, nationally or throughout the world about diversifying our supply of electricity, but we still have these monolithic wind farms. And I look at wind towers and some of the complaints about wind towers, in the oceans or in the sky, and some of the negative impacts that they have. And I say, whatever happened to the prairie windmill? What happened? Why did we not put a little wind generator on top of every house and a couple of solar panels on every house? And I think that you answer that. I think that the answer is there is a lack of an understanding of consumption and also visibility, and
Right.
also there's a lack of the networking between neighbors, and we instead have this monolithic concept of, oh, it's going to be public, and that is then morphed into the corporate investor model, and we're left with monolithic solutions that don't have our interests in mind.
Correct. But it's also important to understand that some of those monolithic corporations are necessary too, because again, it goes back to that whole supply must meet demand. In order for the cul-de-sac, the neighborhood of cul-de-sacs to be able to connect to the larger grid, to connect to one of these investor-owned utility grids, the major transmission, that they need to be sure that when those cul-de-sacs connect into the grid, they're at the proper frequency, they're at the proper the lines carrying those loads can handle that additional load. So there's a lot of research that has to be done, and there's a lot of money into that too. So it's so cost prohibitive that a cul-de-sac worth of individuals wouldn't be able to account for that. So that's why we kind of go back to this hybrid. And I love the question, how decentralized do we need to be? I would like to see that we were decentralized enough that a generating entity, whether that is a group, aggregated, or like I said, just a single power plant model, I'd like to see all of us working in conjunction with each other on some of those things. Again, it goes back to what I was saying. There's a reason why we have some coal plants that also affect other supply chains. There's a reason why we require certain generation that achieves certain temperatures and that kind of thing. This isn't a new idea. Nothing that we're doing is really a new idea. We're just putting it in a different vehicle that is possible for that makes it possible for everybody to see what's out there, everybody to see the consumption that's using, everybody to see the generation that's using, and see the trading opportunities that could take place. And allow everybody a seat at that table. But it is important. I don't want to say this is just a catch-all solution, because there are very real issues with when you take these microgrids and you hook them to the larger grid. Just the principles of physics requires you to be very diligent in something like that. So
Well, I
that's
think Those are one. I love that you point that out, and that you foresee somewhere for the current, especially I think, when I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about coal companies more than anything. And part of the pushback a bit against renewables, and some of the lines about faulting renewables for many of the problems that exist in our electrical grid, have been concerns about being replaced. And I think you're exactly right. We can't function without without larger management that understands the holistic grid. But if we were moving to a microgrid, then I would say that their role would be more dire and more replete. But we are wrapping up on the end of the episode. Do you have a website, or anything where listeners, or we can check into what you're working on, and where you guys are headed in the future?
Yeah, no, we are currently developing that. I would love to get back with you on that. We do have something in place. I'm not ready to make it public yet, just because we are making sure that some certain protections are in place, not just from IP set point, or IP stance, but also from a legal stance as well. Because again, when you start talking about dealing with regulated areas, you really need to know your business. So I'm more than happy to share that with you in due time, which it could be very soon. I have to talk to the rest of my partners that are helping me out with this. But yeah, I'd love to send you some more information. And if that leads into further conversations, because honestly, we could have these, a half-hour conversation about the history of the grid, why we have these issues now, some of the very cool success stories that are out there. So there's a lot of things that we could talk about in future, if you care to. So.
Absolutely. Well, I've definitely enjoyed our conversation today. I'm very interested in what where you go in the future. I think that this is an important. There's maybe nothing more. Well, I don't want to go that far. But the electrical, yes, the our creature comforts in our life, and how they come to us, and how we live around them. It's very important when we miss them, like in Spain, like in California, like in New Mexico. I mean, even here in where I am in the High Plains, last year we had a massive fire over 1 million acres that was started by blowing lines,
Yep.
and it doesn't have to be that way. So I'm glad that you're tackling some of these problems and coming up with solutions. So thanks for coming on today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I'm super excited anytime I hear that we're using blockchain to solve real world problems. The application of the properties of blockchain where it can solve a problem that couldn't have been solved if we didn't have this technology, to me, is fascinating. So I am very excited to have you come back on when you can tell us a bit more about the project. So this is kind of the teaser episode for what we'll hear in the future. So definitely let us know as soon as you guys are ready to announce. We'd love to have you back on the show to talk about it in more detail. So kind of just as a preview, blockchain technology is going to help us solve decentralizing the electrical grid, and Bitcoin's in the mix. This is just fascinating stuff, and I think people will be really excited to hear about what you guys are doing.
Yeah, no, we are very excited. Every time we come across a barrier, it's almost like blockchain leans into that barrier with a solution. It's truly amazing. So I'm excited to share it with you. Thank you for having me.
All right, and we'll see you guys next time on FOMO.